Well, here we are. You may have thought that I've forgotten all of the CBD, but I haven't. Okay, so we're up to part 5, but it's really part 2 of the CBD. Now, in what I did before, it was getting a bit lengthy, you know. And if you've got a 10-minute attention span, it was a bit beyond what you might expect. But anyway, here I am in my red rag glory. Not that I follow that, but still, back in the 40s, I would have been enthusiastically red. It was the lower King Street way, but still. Anyway, now listen, I got to the point of saying that, someone accosted Dr. Roper with a gun, or a revolver, a pistol, I don't really know, on the steps of the post office. Oh, it was a terrible story. I don't know whether people still tell that story, but it was true. Okay. Now, I didn't get round to doing the western side of Alfred Street. Then I'm going to come back because there are a few bits and pieces that I left out. A bit of colour, shall we say. Okay. Now, on the corner, and a block bought very early in the piece, that was on the corner. It used to be, in the early 40s, the Queensland National Bank. That was in the Chester C1401 town survey plan, Block 1, Section 1, Block 1. And that's where probably the first shop was established by the Siemens. Okay. Then I think next door to that was Winchcombe Carson or something like that. I think they were the next one. If they weren't, the next one was Fitzwalters. And then it might have gone the National Bank, Fitzwalters, Winchcombe Carson, or the National Bank, Winchcombe Carson. We'll say Winchcombe Carson, could have been another one, and then Fitzwalters. Now, Fitzwalters was, a long time, very early in the piece, Fitzwalters' shop was there. We didn't have very much to do with that shop because what was the rival? The rival would have been Pall Mall, and we preferred to go to Pall Mall. But Mr. Fitzwalter, I think he must have been in league, with that old rogue Eichmann of the Charleville Hotel, because it was certainly to Mr. Fitzwalter's advantage, as much as it was to Mr. Eichmann's advantage, that the train came this way, the bridge traffic came this way, and they both were feeding towards the Charleville Hotel and Fitzwalter's store. He knew what side his bread was buttered on, that's for sure, and he knew how to use the influence of Eichmann. But I'm told that my great-grandmother was a good friend of Mrs. Fitzwalter. And she and Mrs. Fitzwalter used to ride out in a buggy. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't really know, but that's the story my cousin Nora told me. And if Nora told me, then it was surely true. Okay, so now the Fitzwalter store was a bit like Pall Mall, but it had a peculiarity, which I thought was, I found it a little bit oldie-worldy. You didn't actually pay money at the counter. You went to the counter, but overhead were a lot of lines, you see. And so the shop assistant would write a docket out and say how much whatever you'd bought was going to cost. And then they would fit your money and the docket into a sort of a clip on the bottom of a sort of a little cylinder of some kind. And they'd fit it up above their heads, then they'd pull the lever and it would across the shop. And Miss Carr, I think it was, a little woman, a little lady, and she was in an office right up top at the back of the shop in the middle, and all commercial traffic went through the air to her. Then she would deal with the thing, and if there was change, I think it went into the cylinder, boom, back it would come to you. Maybe it was thought of as being fairly modern, but I don't know. I preferred to pay cash and get cash there on the spot. But I think they sold much the same sorts of things as Pall Pall Mall sold, but I can't say that I had sufficient familiarity with it to be able to say with any great certainty. Maybe there was a grocery section there, I don't know. Maybe there was a clothing section down the other end. But anyway, that's it. Now, after that, I become pretty vague. What the shops were, that I don't know, except that I know that at the end of the block, that block of shops, that sort of ended about opposite, or what shall we say, as I recall, about opposite where Jack Aiken's news agency was, I think. And if you go to Historic House now, in the yard they've got an old lock-up, and I think that the shops ended just before that lock-up. But, I'm getting on, and I haven't studied this in detail for any great length of time. But I do know that the final shop was the Charleville Times. And but what was between Charleville Times and Fitzwalter's or the Wincham Castle or whatever, I really can't tell you. But whatever they were shops that we didn't have very much to do with anyway. Now we had no objection to Fitzwalter's. They were, as I understand, they were politically aligned with the Lower King Street. I just think that we liked Pall Mall, and so we went there. They were very approachable people, all of them who worked there. Then if you went on beyond that, I know that you went on a little bit beyond that, and I don't know whether that building that's now Historic House was there then or not. I don't really know. But I do know that you then came to the Merway Shire office. Now, I think the Merway Shire office in those days was a dumpy sort of place. It added nothing much to the town. I mean, now, of course, it's a grand palace. But I think in the early 40s it was a bit of a, sort of 19th century bungalow almost. Still, but anyway, on you went a little bit from there. Now, if you went on from there, now remember, if you come to Section 1, Allotment 6, that was the original site, or that was the site of the original Victoria Hotel, prior to that, Cooper's Hotel, the Warrego Hotel, I've given that story elsewhere. But of course it burnt down in 1916, and by that time the Janetskys had got rid of it. Mrs. Janetsky was Louisa Adrian at that point. She died in 1936, I think it was, or 37, approximately. I could look it up, but, approximately will do it for the moment. Anyway, but by that time it had been sold, and the lady who then owned it, when it burned down on Allotment 6, she then rebuilt it on Allotment 7. And Allotment 6 was vacant for a few years. I don't know how many years, but certainly by the early 40s, Allotment 6 was no longer vacant because it had been populated, we will say, by 3 community recreational facilities. Right down the back, there was the swimming pool. It was a 25-metre swimming pool with a dirty big plug down one end. You wouldn't have wanted to get stuck in it. But I suppose they had some mechanism for clearing everyone out and then pulling the plug. And I think the water must have flowed down to the river, which was, I think, a fairly, what would one say? Oh, no, it wouldn't have actually flown into the river. It would have flown into that sort of billabong. You know how there's the main bridge and then there's a little bridge before it, and that's sort of, we'll call it a billabong, Anna branch or something, and that chlorinated water would have flowed down into that, and so therefore, otherwise it would have killed all the fish in that part of the river, which obviously, well, I don't know whether it did or not. We never went fishing there, and I don't know if anyone, probably other people did go fishing there. But anyway, the thing is that right at the back there was the swimming pool. And it had some dressing sheds on one side and, plenty of galvanised iron round about. Then in front of that there was a skating rink. Cement. I think it had a few cracks in it and that sort of thing. But nevertheless, it was well regarded in the town, I think. We never went to it, of course. But But, you used to get those roller skates, I think 2 wheels in front and 2 wheels on the back, and away you'd go. God only knows what the Hoons did when they went there, but they're probably a bit of yahooing, I don't really know. But anyway, it was pretty popular, I think. And then beside that, there was the croquet green, as I recall. I think the gentlemen bowlers were around the corner. I think, I can't remember the name. It was called Mr. East's, I think, Orchard. But I think that may have been round the corner there somewhere. I'm not quite sure. But I'm fairly sure it was the lady croquet people. I remember, Mrs. Harriman and Mrs. Espy and, fairly substantial ladies. It seems as if you played croquet, you had to be, well, what shall we say? You had to be ample. Ample would be the word. Okay, then. And they'd wear white stockings and white shoes and white dresses and so on. And I take it that these croquet games went on for hours and hours and hours. Apparently boredom was no problem. And then there was a bit of a lane beside that, because when there'd be a lane between allotment 6 and allotment 7. Or yes, allotment 6 and allotment 7, and then that's where the new Victoria was built. And of course, by the early 40s, that was called Hull's Hotel by that time. And well, I don't think we had much to do with Hull's either, but nevertheless. But it did have one story that I thought was, I didn't believe this story, I can tell you. When I was in grade 4, we had a teacher called Jack Walsh. Jack was a tallish sort of man, as I recall. He was a nice teacher. I liked him. Very good. He was well connected with the local rugby league club, and he stayed at the Hull's Hotel. But there was a story went around the school one day. Now, as I say, I believed that there were physical impediments which made this impossible. Although I repeated the story, of course, and I still do, but I add doubt to it. Though at the time, I felt doubt then, even then. But the story was that Jack Walsh, our grade 3 teacher, who stayed at Hull's Hotel, was seen one day or one morning urinating, although that wasn't the word that was used, urinating from the balcony of Hull's Hotel into the street below. That would be into Alfred Street. Well, it was a good story. But I think that there was those slat blinds were there along that veranda, the upper veranda, or there was a vine or something there. And I can remember thinking at the time, I have reservations about this story, because I think that might be physically impossible. And in any case, probably would have been sewered by would have had the sewerage would have been put in by that time. Why would Jack want to piss into the street from the balcony? I really do not know. Unless, of course, it was in summer and he had a bed out on the veranda, I don't know. But that was the only piece of news I had heard. Anyway, you'd keep on going from there and you'd cross over the road and you'd get to the old powerhouse. And the old powerhouse, my Uncle Tom used to be one of we'll call him the engineers there. And we went in once to have a look at it. And he gave us the innards, I think, of a meter, which had some, what do they call it? What's that silver sort of stuff? Oh dear, I can't remember. I mean, I should know, but I'm getting on, And we were said to school that if you fed this poisonous silver stuff, that disseminated itself into beads if you dropped it on the floor. And it was said that if you put some of this silver stuff, whatever it may have been, gee, I tell you what, I'm failing quick. But if you put it into the mouth of a duck, it went straight through the duck. No sooner had you put it in its mouth, then boom, out the duck's bum it would come. Well, I don't think that was so, but nevertheless, that's what we were told. Science, you see, we did science even in those days. Then you'd move on a little bit from there, and I think there was some couple of one house, 2 houses. Then you came to another laneway, and then there was another building. That building, of course, was 2 floors. Now, on the lower floor was Binny's Hardware and Undertaking. And then along a bit from there, I don't know what, there was something else there. And then just on the end of it, there was the 4VL studios at that point, and they were upstairs. At the back of the Binny's Hardware, there was a sort of a shed, which I supposed contained an array, a selection for your choosing of coffins. Whether Mr. Binney had one standard coffin type or not, I don't really know. But anyway, I'm sure he kept his... He didn't keep his coffins in that hardware shop on Alfred Street. They must have been down the back. Whether he had a viewing room or not, I don't really know, because I don't know that we had any call for his services quite at that point. But he had a van, you know. Now, I mentioned the Rices. The Rices were down there near Herriman's, near Mick Dunn's butcher shop. But they had this ugly, bloody 19th century hearse, square sort of thing, arum lilies etched into the glass. I wouldn't have used them, that's for sure. I'd have walked to the cemetery rather than go in that thing. But I think most people felt that way too, you know. But Benny's had a van, and it had removable panels in the side, you see. Now, when it was not being used for funeral purposes, it said Benny's Hardware or whatever. But when it was used for funeral, they had very tasteful glass fitted into the side, and it just served as the hearse. Very modern, I can tell you. And, you know, well, I mean, I'd have reasonably happily gone to the cemetery in Benny's hearse, but I wouldn't have gone in that hearse belonging to the Rices, that's for sure. Gee, I would have risen from the dead in protest. That's a certain thing. But I did get a fright one day, you know. I knew that van was a double-purpose van. And one day I was up there near the School of Arts Hotel. And Benny's van went past. It had, you know, Benny's Hardware and so on, but the back door was slightly open. And sticking out of the back door was, I thought, a human foot. You know, it was boom, boom, you know, like that. Oh, I thought, for God's sake, Mr. Benny is going around town and there's a body in the back of it and there's a foot sticking out the back. Well, I was scandalised by this, I can tell you. Anyway, it turned out it was just a drain pipe. And I was much, much relieved. But anyway, now let me think. In that side of the street, there was no colour there, as I recall. You know, there was Jack reputedly pissing into Alfred Street, but I do not believe that. I do not believe it. Jack would have, of course, you know, in an emergency, if there was a, you know, vacant sign on the, or not vacant, what do they call it? Occupied. Sign on the WC door upstairs. Maybe he was in a hurry. I think he liked a drink or two, and maybe there was a sense of urgency about it. I don't really know. But anyway, I do think, though, that there was a physical impediment. Anyway, how would you know? Supposing he was behind those green slat blinds, and they got a dreadful hiding in that hailstorm, I can tell you. Oh, there was just the wire coming down, everything was broken. But those blind slats were there, and I think Jack would have been behind there. So that's why I doubted the story. But it didn't stop me from repeating it because, you know, if you had a good story, why not repeat it? And that was it. Okay. Now, a couple of things I did forget. I forgot a shop on the other side of the street. I told you about Jim Carey's shop, and I told you about Austin's shoe shop, and I told you about Jack Aiken's shop, and I told you about that, and so on and so on. Okay. But there was one shop in the middle. It was a long, narrow shop. It was a cafe. I don't know what it was called, but it was Jimmy Chickless's Cafe. Now, I don't know that we ever patronised it, but I did go in a couple of times. It was very dark. Now, if you went to the Bellevue Cafe in Wool Street, well, you could buy sandwiches, toasted sandwiches, malted milks, salads, and whatever else. Oh, and Rocky Road chocolate, I might add. My mother used to buy 2 shillings worth of Rocky Road chocolate, not much. And when she'd come home, she'd sort of feed it to us in little pecks, you know, much as a mother bird might feed a, whatever one calls a small bird. And because there wasn't much more, I can tell you, because Mum couldn't afford more than 2 bobs worth of Rocky Road. So there'd be just a little bit of Rocky Road, and here, a little bit for you, a little bit for you, and boom, it was gone. But anyway, that was Bellevue. It was quite nice. And but Jimmy Chickless's was a very dark shop, because I think if you wanted a mixed grill, you went to Jimmy Chickless's. Well, of course, mixed grills produce smoke, and so the walls and ceilings were sort of very, very dark, and it didn't really attract, you know. So, of course, there was another story which I do not believe. I say this. I do not believe this, but I repeated the story, as many people in town did. It was reputed, I hesitate to say it, but it was said that Jim used to piss in the sink. Well, I mean, why would he bother? Why would he bother? He could have gone out the back, and surely there was a WC there somewhere. Why would Jim piss in the sink? But that's what they said. Oh, of course, that was the other end of town. You know, those people at the other end of town, they had wicked tongues, I can tell you. Okay, then. So, we didn't really wish to leave that out. I think once you went beyond Fourvielle, I think he must have come up there to the cattle camp, you know. The cattle camp. I think they ultimately changed its name to the Rivette or something, but I didn't think much of that name. Of course, my brother-in-law, fine man, Billy Curley. Billy used to drink there, you know, because he lived in Burke Street and used to drive, I might add, round the corner and drive home. Of course, the cops caught him once, you know. Then they waited until he drove into his yard before they said, hey, you've been driving under the influence. And he would have been fairly much under the influence, I would have thought. But nevertheless, oh dear, the cattle camp. It had one event, when the war finished, you know, in 1945, there was general celebration on that very day. I can remember that day so well. Of course, I remember these things early in the piece, you see. But on that particular day, there was general festivity in the town. You see, we knew the war was going to be declared finished at 11 a.m. on that particular day. Well, of course, the siren went and we knew the war was over. Everyone descended upon the middle of the town. Well, one of my relatives, so it is said, maybe I shouldn't mention because you never know, there could be relatives who would take offence. They may sue me. Well, of course, you know, I mean, at my age, what's the use of suing me? I'd delay the case somehow or another. You know, I'd somehow go before, I'd go before you got me into the court. But one of my relatives, not of the blood, I might add, an in-law, danced on the bar of the Cattle Camp Hotel to celebrate the end of the war. That same relative also used to give football referees who came up with a decision that she wasn't keen on a bit of a dust-up. And she had been known, you know, to invade the dressing room under what was called the grandstand at the football club, and it cost, I don't know, either an errant player or, a badly scoring Cunnamulla fellow, winning scoring Cunnamulla fellow, or Augathella fellow, or Quilpie fellow, or Tampa fellow, whoever it may have been. Yes, she was a bit of a spitfire there, I can tell you, but nevertheless, that was all to do with the, of course, when my brother-in-law, Billy, was taken to court, he was found not guilty, of course. Or he was forgiven, I think. He was forgiven because he'd made such a fine contribution to the town. So any momentary lapse was... Of course, you know, he used to offend his wife from time to time. I do believe, now this is a story that's told, I can barely believe it, but it is told within the family that Billy was once there sitting within the confines of the Cattle Camp Hotel enjoying a beer long beyond his dinner time, and my sister was a little impatient, and it is said that Billy was sitting drinking a beer when suddenly a fist came through the window. Boom! "Get home," she said, and she connected. Well, of course, Billy went home. I don't think he was under the influence of that, but nevertheless, that's the sort of thing that went on. Now, let me go back because I think I left out a little bit. As I say, we didn't really go to we didn't really use Cook and O'Malley's because Cook and O'Malley's were gentlemen's outfitters. High quality stuff, you know. If you wanted tailoring done, you went to Cook and O'Malley's. Well, we weren't gentlemen and we couldn't really afford high quality. And these cooks who worked there seemed a little bit austere to us, whereas down in Pall Mall, I think it was Claude Cook. He was much more approachable. But, down there at the Pall Mall, you had Mrs. Häusler, and you had Gladys Cook, and you had Claude Cook, and you had Rex O'Sullivan, and you had Rue Ferguson. And that was a really lovely shop to deal with. And I don't think it's probably not like that anymore. But a great pity, that it's gone that way. The only other, I left out a little bit about the School of Arts. Now, the School of Arts, it's called the School of Arts Hotel because over the road where the town hall now is, that was the site of the School of Arts. Now, towards the end of the 19th century, schools of arts were found all over the place, and these provided reading rooms, and they were sort of promoting the sort of self-learning, the education of people who had didn't have the opportunity of a lot of formal schooling. And so the School of Arts probably, a sort of social centre, reading room, all of that type of thing. But that particular School of Arts, whose design was very similar to the design of the current town hall. But I don't know how long it lasted, but of course it burnt down. I don't know why it burnt down, but it did burn down. The old caretaker was burnt to death when it burnt down. But of course the School of Arts hotel must have been built around about that time also. And so it took on the name of the School of Arts Hotel because it was over the road from the School of Arts. I'm not sure about this, if you go down to the cemetery, you'll see a grave there for, is it Pierce Brosnan, if I remember rightly? Pierce Brosnan, why did I just, Pierce Dalton, Pierce Dalton. And he had been Pierce Dalton may have been the licensee at one stage of maybe the Victoria Hotel at one stage. I can't be sure about that, but I know he moved down ultimately. I think he moved down ultimately to the School of Arts. But he was the father of Miss Lucinda Dalton. Now, Miss Lucinda Dalton, when she was young, she was a great performer, and she was a great favourite at concerts and all that sort of thing, and she was often written up in the Charleville Times about her wonderful performances and her wonderful acting and her wonderful singing and so on. And that was our Miss Lucinda Dalton. I did see a mention of Miss Lucinda Dalton when she was married. I can't remember the year. She married a fellow from out Wallal way, and that's how I think she became Mrs. Bryant. But there we are. But anyway, at the School of Arts Hotel, it was run by Gertie Steer. And in the 40s, the football coach used to stay there. What was his name? About the mid-40s, Beattie. That would have been about 4 into 6. That's about, 3, 4, 5, 6. About 48, 49, I would have thought. A fellow called Beattie was the football coach. They stayed there. And but in the early 40s, a number of the teachers used to stay there because, it was handy, and the reputation of the hotel couldn't have been too bad. And it was easy to walk to school and so on. And maybe I don't know that the hotel was ever regarded as a hotel of great quality. I do know that, how should I put this? Well, I won't mention any names or anything like that, but let me say that a person known to us did operate a business from there, and one of the teachers that we knew well said to my mother, "Oh, Mrs. Bilby, do you know that woman?" Well, Mrs. Bilby had no choice but to say she knew the woman. "Oh," said Mrs. Lehane, "the men queue up outside her door." Anyway, that was in the School of Arts Hotel, and that was simultaneous with the staying there of some of the teachers. So, oh dear, they must have been scandalised, I'm sure. Anyway, but I left out another thing. Behind, as you come along the street, near Akak Baker's A1 agency, there was a fountain there. I don't know when the fountain was erected there, sometime in the 40s. I don't know. It must have been after 45, I think. But it's now been moved down outside the RSL Hotel, opposite where Toddy Collins' house is, and in Watson Street. And but the fountain was originally there in Will Street. It was opened with it was supposed to be open with grandeur and flair, because we received a visit, I think for that special purpose, by the Duke of Gloucester. Well, the fountain was in memory of a British airman who had died in a plane crash. I remember the plane crash because we heard this great explosion one morning, and I was still in bed, I think, but I don't know what time it was, but nevertheless it was in the morning. The plane crashed and the British airman was killed. And I think that's why the Duke of Gloucester was required, or whatever, sent to Charleville to open the fountain, you see. You know, where you turn the thing and there'd be a piss-weak squirt of bore water through there. But anyway, it was to be a grand occasion. The Duke of Gloucester was probably staying at the Coroner's Hotel. Well, we were waiting for the Duke of Gloucester to come, and Mrs. Kirk, old Boy Kirk's wife. We had little Australian flags. We had Union Jacks, more Union Jacks than Australian flags. And we were ready to wave and wave and wave. You know, it was going to be very exciting. The Duke of Gloucester was going to come and he was going to open the fountain. Well, he did. He rolled up, but he was pissed. He stumbled out of the car, pulled the flag off the thing. 30 seconds later, he was gone. I can tell you what, a British hangman would have done his job more quickly than the Duke of Gloucester opened that fountain. Well, Mrs. Kirk was, shall we say, her jaw dropped. She was deflated. Well, as we were all deflated, because we expected ceremony and occasion. And so there we were. Okay, then now let me see. I mentioned that one, and I mentioned the queue in the School of Arts. There. No, I think that's about it. Oh, wait a minute. Now, if I go down Watson Street, you go down that. I might as well go down there. Picture show was, behind the town hall. Wonderful building. Pity they ever knocked it down. And then beside that was McGaw's. They had the house had a name. I can't remember what it was. But it had a sort of frame-coloured name. And then beside that was a sort of cafe. In 1945, it belonged to Peter Salms. Oh, my mother taught us bad things, you know. She used to say, don't you make a pig of yourself. Don't you be too greedy, lest people think we're poor or you've got no manners. Well, the war ended. And up to town we went. The shops were all open. Eat what you want. Take what you want. Well, why didn't I make a pig of myself? I went into the St. Peter Salms' shop. You could have what you wanted. But I didn't want to appear ill-mannered. And what did I take? I took a threepenny pig's trotter. Well, I tell you, more fool me, when I could have taken the shop. Pig's trotter, indeed. But anyway, then that was there. Then over the road from there, you had Charleville Motors. Okay, look, a bit chesty, as they say. Now, Charleville Motors, used to be the agent for the picture show. And when you wanted to book seats for the picture show, you didn't go down to Tate's. News agency. You went to the Charleville Motors. You make your bookings there. And if you look at some of those old photos of the Charleville Motors, you'll find in the background posters for the various talkies that were on over there at the Municipal Theatre. And then you pass a little bit beyond that. I can remember, there must have been a timber yard there, I think. A.S. Dawkins, perhaps, or they may have been down there near the water tower. I was old enough to came. But then you came to another cafe. And the very first one there that I can recall was Argus Watts Cafe. And Argus used to make the best pies that I've ever tasted in all my life, and no pies I've ever had. He'd have this wonderful puff pastry, the most wonderful filling, and the pies were sixpence. Oh, if only we'd been given sixpence. We had six. I think when we went to the matinee on Saturday afternoons, I don't know how much the matinee cost, but we didn't always have sixpence. So we didn't always enjoy a pie there, but, you know, sometimes I think it's at lunchtime at school, if we had sixpence, my mother gave us a shilling, we could go down to Argoswald and we could get one of these sixpenny pies, and we could probably also get a malted milk. Well, I mean, who would trade a malted milk and some sandwiches at the Bellevue for one of Argoswald's pies and the malted milk? Oh, it was very, very good. And then, I don't know, then I think Steele's house was beside that. Now, the Steele family, gee, I'd hate to have been a Steele, you know, or a Tate for that matter, as I recall. They knew something about radios. Well, that did them no good during the war, because people used to say they're secretly communicating, may be secretly communicating with Japanese. Well, I dare say if they had been, it would have been known, but just as Jack was said to have pissed from the balcony of the Holes Hotel, there were many things that were said that didn't bear much relationship to the truth, that's for sure. So it was a very uncomfortable time for them, I'm sure, but that's the sort of thing that went on at that time. And I mentioned Harriman's garage. You know, it had been the Cobb & Co. building. Well, the Cobb & Co. building did burn down at one stage. This would have been the resurrected, you know, like the Phoenix. And at that time, not only was it the Cobb & Co. Not only was it Harriman's garage, you used to be able to drive your car and it would be serviced. And I was scandalised, you know, scandalised. Look, my teeth nearly fell out, because there's a big sign at the back of the, you know, there used to be a pit. They could go down into the pit and then they could work up, you know, the cars from underneath the pit. But it had a sign at the end of it, which I thought was extremely rude, and I was quite not taken, but I was offended by it. Can we muff-up your car? Well, I think it was Greece or something they were talking about. But this sign that said, can we muff-up your car, it offended me, I can tell you. And it still does. I mean, fancy that. But anyway, nevertheless, the garage was a garage, but it was also the agent for TAA. And when you wanted to fly anywhere with TAA, or Butler Airways, I would have thought, because they probably also, because Butlers used to go down Cunnamulla, Burke, Sydney, something like that. And but if you they used to have a set of scales in there, you know, that you weigh sacks of potatoes on, because when you flew in the 1940s and early 50s, you had to be weighed. You had to go up and be weighed before you could fly, and so you would go up to Harriman's, and on the potato scales you'd get on there and you'd be weighed so that they knew the weight of the weight of the plane. But anyway. That was just, you know, a little bit of interest. But behind there was the real interest, because Harriman's built an iceworks there. And the iceworks is very good because, well, they couldn't deliver ice during the war because they didn't have the petrol. And they had to take the ice with the petrol they had over to the hospital. But but they would deliver ice around town, and, you know, you used to have ice chests. And I remember we were first fridge, I don't know when that would have been, first fridge about 1951, 52, something like that. Oh, we thought it was right. Didn't get any ice in it, of course, and we had to get another one. Made in Toowoomba, Little Penguin it was called. They didn't really work. We got another more decent one. Kerosene, you know. And but anyway, but before that you used to have a what's called an ice chest. And you'd get these little blocks of ice, you know, about this big. Yeah, about that big. No, that big. Like that. And you'd put them in the ice block. And that was supposed to keep your butter and milk and so on cool. Well, this was the theory of it anyway. And but we liked it because when they would make the ice, they'd make the ice in great big blocks. You know, they must have been about a metre high, something like that. Well, a metre high block of ice was not much use to most people. And so they had one of these saws, I don't know what they call them, you know, bandsaw or something, you know, I'd cut your head off quick if you got near it. And anyway, they'd get there and then they'd cut the big blocks of ice into, there was smaller blocks and bigger blocks of ice. But when the bandsaw would cut through the ice, it would shave the ice and all the ice would fall down a little sort of mountain underneath. Well, we thought this was very wonderful. And we used to go over at lunchtime from the school, and we would go into the iceworks and we'd say, "Can we have some dog's ice, please?" Now, why we call it dog's ice, I really do not know, but it was called dog's ice. So we'd go over and we'd get a few handfuls of dog's ice. Well, we didn't have anything to put it in, so there would have been a few handfuls. But anyway, because it was nice, finely cut, and it was cooling, which was certainly a relief, and certainly a difference from the boiling hot water that we had to drink at the school. But anyway, that was it. Now, look, I can't think now if I left out any interesting things. There, and there, there. No, I can't remember. I think I've given you all of the facts and speculations. So there we are. Okay, now that's got that part of town covered. And if there's a future historian that's, when there's a big fire and they hear the name of a shop, maybe that will help a little bit. But I tell you, my memory is reasonably good, but a little bit vague. Some shops will have disappeared from my mind altogether, and I may have them, roughly in the wrong, instead of being here, they might have been beside it or something. And but that's a fair approximation of the thing. And needless to say, as in all things Charlevillian, there it was. There was a fire occasionally, well, more than one fire occasionally, and there was often a little bit of a backstory to each of them. Very little about Charleville doesn't have a backstory. But anyway, listen, there are plenty of backstories to come. Believe them if you will. But I will tell you, if I didn't believe them, I will tell you. Yes, there are a couple of them. If you go right down to the corner, beyond the picture show, down to where near the ambulance station is now, I think. And then you go diagonally opposite the ambulance station. There's quite a nice little cottage there now. That was burnt down once, But that's another story which has family connections. I'll tell you more. That is sometimes. Oh God, why with all of these stories were we connected? I wonder, were other families connected with some of these more colourful stories? I do not know. So anyway, there we are. In my lifetime, I've done all sorts of things. I've been here, I've been there, I've studied here, I've studied there, I've travelled here, I've travelled there, lived here, lived there. And sometimes I manage to affect a certain degree of urbanity, a certain degree of sophistication. But I think it's largely affectation, because, deep in the core is Lower King Street. And, they say you can take the boy out of Lower King Street, but you can't take the Lower King Street out of the boy. So there we are. Anyway, you may as well know, and I tell you without shame, because I'm too old for shame.